Some old friends we haven't seen for a while. So thank you so much for joining us and being such a vital part of our community. And just a shout out to all of you. We so appreciate all of your referrals. The people you send us for boot camp are just amazing. And we can't thank you enough for continuing to forward those not just resumes, but forwarding people and connections to us. We also want to say thank you for the client referrals also. You know, what is that number, Christy? 95% of our clients come from the bootcamp community, either from you yourselves landing and we help you, or you refer us into other companies. So again, a huge shout out. We so appreciate all that you do for us. So wishing you a great weekend and enjoy the session this morning.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce you to Scott Woodard. And Scott is a career coach and a company consultant, and he helps people with leadership. And so Scott has quite a storied career. He was a consultant for a number of years, and he even was a policy analyst, I read. So gosh, that's kind of interesting. But I've known Scott for just a little bit. I met him through a mutual group that we're in, and he's helped one of our boot campers. And so I know that he's got rave reviews already. Really excited about having him speak, and he's going to share more about how to demonstrate your value and get people to shift the way that they look at you. So Scott, with that, I'm turning it over to you. So if everyone can mute themselves and then put your questions in the chat. We're going to allot plenty of time for questions, and Scott will address as many as possible. So Scott, take it away.
Okay, well, good morning all from Southern Maine, kind of the complete opposite end of the country where I guess most of you are. I'm happy to be able to talk with you today, and appreciate Christy and her team for the opportunity to do this. So what I do is I help leaders achieve their highest potential, like say, help them level up in their careers. And as I work with folks who are looking to move forward, I've noticed that their biggest challenge is to tell the right story of the value that they bring to an organization. You know, the fact is, the higher we advance in our careers, the more our challenges tend to be behavioral. As we rise, you know, everyone really is smart, capable, and accomplished. And it's the behavioral changes that we can make that will be significant as we move forward. There's a great book, if you haven't read it, I really recommend it. It's What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith, who's a leading executive coach. And the full title is What Got You Here Won't Get You There: How Successful People Become Even More Successful. And Marshall Goldsmith, as I said, is a world-renowned executive coach, and he explores how beliefs and habits affect career success. And his basic premise is that the beliefs that have served us well as we've progressed in our careers aren't going to do so much for us as we move on and as we advance. In fact, they may work against us. We often hold on to those habits and beliefs, but we are not realizing the impact that they've had on those around us. And often those people are folks who have a say in the advancement of our careers. So we need to have some career proprioception. So proprioception is I'll spell it out because it's not an easy one. Proprioception. Proprioception. Sounds like a spelling bee word. Proprioception is a medical term that speaks to the ability to sense stimuli rising within the body regarding your position, your motion, and your equilibrium. So even a blindfolded person can tell whether their arm is raised in the air or dangling down by its side. So proprioception is about knowing where you are and how you're oriented. Career proprioception is knowing how your skills and expertise reflect where you want to be. So I'd like to share with you the stories of a few folks that I've worked with over the last year or so. The first one is George. George is a senior technology leader. He's been a CTO. He's been a VP of engineering. George self-identifies as an engineer. His degree was in engineering, and just about every role that he has had has the term engineer in the position title. You know, he came out of college, he was an engineer one, working on pretty basic engineering projects. After a year or so, he was promoted to an engineer two, where he worked on a little bit more sophisticated projects. And after a few years for that, he was promoted to an engineer three, you know, where he maybe led a small team, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's always been identifying as an engineer. Over the past 15 years or so, George has successfully led global product development projects, often with remote and culturally diverse teams. And he's been able to keep these teams focused on the visions of their projects. And he's built strong team relationships among the teams that has really made him stronger than the sum of their parts. And so while George still sees himself as an engineer, he'll never be hired for his engineering chops ever again. He will be hired for his leadership chops. Bill is a senior attorney. He's a partner in a law firm. He's been a successful litigator on a complex health-related issue, and he's argued cases on this issue for almost 20 years. But he's ready to try something new. He's getting tired of practicing law and chasing billable hours. He'd like to have a broader strategic impact on an organization, perhaps as a general counsel or a VP of a healthcare system. But Bill continues to cite cases he's worked on as an indicator of his value. And he needs to be able to tell stories of how he can take complex, often highly scientific information and break it down so others can understand it. He needs to show how this information can lead to advancing strategies and moving complex problems forward. Our last person, Sandy, is ready to return to work after taking 7 years off to raise her two boys. Sandy graduated from a prestigious university that led to a number of competitive and important roles in both government and in business, where she's worked for 12 years. And she has an extensive local network here in Southern Maine based on her community involvement in a lot of nonprofit organizations as a member of these nonprofit boards. As Sandy goes to her network and starts to ask people about opportunities that they might be aware of and to get her engaged in her search, her new search, she's really having difficulty understanding why these colleagues on these boards of directors don't fully grasp the significance of her prestigious education and her work advising high-level leaders in government and in business. She needs to be able to talk about building relationships with organizational leaders that result in paths forward for key projects and key programs. So George, Bill, and Sandy have slightly dented senses of proprioception based on their careers. They're all relying on old stories to get them to where they want to be. In addition, the stories that they're telling position them as commodities. While the three of them bring a certain expertise, it's not as specific subject matter experts anymore, at least not the value in that. A subject matter expert is a commoditized role. And then commoditized roles are skill-based, and they're easily interchangeable. At some point, just like the gunslingers in the old Wild West, there's going to be someone coming along that's faster, younger, and cheaper, and is going to be able to fulfill your role at a more value-based, compensation value-based than you. So George, Bill, and Sandy can no longer rely on being the smartest ones in the room with all the right answers all the time. They need new stories. And they need to reorient their experience to demonstrate their value as strategic assets rather than commoditized subject matter experts. Asset-based value focuses more on a strategic framework of strengths and incorporates wisdom, which becomes your leadership narrative, your value proposition, your statement of unique value, which sets you apart from your competition.
Yeah.
Does somebody have a question? Okay. Fortunately, it didn't take long to get Bill and George and Sandy on track. Each of them took the Clifton Strengths assessment to discover their top 5 strengths. This Clifton Strengths assessment was developed by a guy named Don Clifton about 30 some odd years ago. It's gone through a series of iterations, but Clifton was a pioneer in the positive psychology movement, and he developed the initial assessment for organizations to refocus their performance reviews on strengths to be enhanced versus weaknesses to be improved. So we've all gone through, an annual or semi-annual or quarterly performance review, and we go in and sit with our boss, and the boss says, Scott, we've looked over your work for the last few months, and frankly, we need you to be better at strategic planning. We need you to be better at project management, and these are all the things that I'm weak at, right? And Clifton said that's the wrong approach. What we need to do is focus on their strengths. So my boss should say, Scott, we're looking over your work over the last 6 months, and we're really impressed with the fact that you've been able to bring teams together, and you've been able to lead them, in a common vision and accomplish these directions. We're going to give you more opportunities to do that in the next year. So that's Clifton. He developed the Clifton Strengths to be able to identify people's top 5 strengths in this particular assessment. We can provide the link to this assessment. It's a 30-minute online assessment, and I can provide the link if you want in the chat or in the Q&A, Christy, wherever you'd like that done. It costs about $20 if you're interested in doing this. I will say I'm not I have no affiliation with them. I don't get a piece of that $20, but I just, full disclosure, costs about $20, takes about 30 minutes. And I will tell you, I'll offer, if you decide to take it and you'd want some feedback, I'll offer to provide some feedback on the top 5 strengths. So if you take the assessment, send me an email. Again, I'll put my email in the chat if it's not already available. Remind me how we met, and send me your top 5 strengths, and I'll be glad to provide you some feedback and insight around that. So we got Bill and George and Sandy working on their assessment. We identified each of their top 5 strengths from the Clifton Strengths assessment. And then we worked out some responses to some key questions for them. And the first question was, what do I solve for? What's the problem that I solve when I'm part of a team, when I'm part of an organization? Organizations hire because they have a problem to be solved, not because they have a vacancy. They save money on a vacancy. Now that vacancy might cost them more money the more it's vacant, but really they're not hiring because someone left as much as they're hiring because that person that left was serving a vital need in their organization. So if you're going to present yourself and present your value, you have to know what it is you solve for. So for George, our engineering leader, he solves operational challenges for technical products from development to market. our attorney, Bill, our law partner, distills highly complex information for lay decision makers, judges, juries, regulators. And these responses get these folks to begin to shift from seeing themselves as subject matter experts, an engineer, a litigator in a particular health issue, to more of a strategic asset. They're not focusing on the fact that they graduated from whatever law school or that they have whatever certification in terms of their engineering degrees. They're talking about their strategic leadership. The second question that we talked about with them was, in a sentence or two, what is it I do well? And this is a very important question because it begins to inform their tagline, their professional branding tagline. So for Bill, the attorney, he synthesizes highly scientific information that drives strategies around complex issues. Sandy builds relationships to develop effective teams and to be able to execute on both established and startup programs. She can bring teams together and take an ongoing program and take it up to the next level and keep it and make it successful. Or she can do that with a program starting from scratch. This is an important response to these questions of what I do well, because as I said, it informs their branding tagline. And we use it when we draft up their resume, when we create a LinkedIn profile, but we also get them to use it when they're talking to their network about what they do and what they're looking for, or in their interview. First question in a job interview is typically, so, Sandy, tell me about yourself. Sandy's not going to go back and say, well, I graduated from a prestigious university and, I had these great jobs and before I left to go raise my kids. She's going to talk about her ability to build relationships and develop effective teams that move projects forward. It's not a set it and forget it. When you go and Sandy goes and talks to her network, those colleagues on a boards of directors and the nonprofit organizations that she's affiliated with, that she's going to now talk about her ability to develop effective teams and execute on established projects. So she begins to reshape the context that these folks are going to see her in, right? So it's important to have this and to be able to use it on a regular basis. The third question that we got these three folks to work on is, what examples from my career demonstrate what I do well and convey my value as a strategic asset? So this is where we begin to align their career successes with their 5 strengths from the Clifton assessment. And we begin to develop stories around those successes aligned to their strengths. And we use a model in developing those stories we call SARS, S-A-R. And S stands for the situation, which is the problem statement. A is for the actions that you've taken to address that problem. And R are results, the impact of your actions on the problem. So we use this information to convey their leadership narrative. This is really proves to be a difficult exercise for a lot of folks because we're not used to telling these kinds of stories about ourselves and how great we were, right? And a lot of times we put emphasis on the wrong thing. So usually when I work with George or Bill or Sandy, and they're doing this exercise, they put a lot of time and effort and explanation into the situation. Oh my God, it was a big disaster. We were about to go down the tubes. We were over budget and we were way beyond our allotted time. The whole thing was going down the tubes and it was horrible. What we need is a concise problem statement. We had a team that wasn't coalescing and it was endangering the budget and the time frame for the project. Very crisp and concise. The actions, are where people spend the least time. So, I saw this and I went in and I solved it. So, but this is where real value shows up, especially on the strategic side. So there's always a template really that we follow when we're problem solving, right? There's the identification of a problem. There's a bringing together of a team to begin to tackle that problem. There's a design of a potential resolution of the problem. There's a test of that design and modification based on the results of the test, and then leading to an execution. All those are critical components that we need to be able to talk about our role in that. And again, it's not so much doing the work, but recognizing the issues and bringing people together. Those are the strategic components of problem solving. And then finally, what are the impacts of all those actions that you've taken on the problem? And a lot of times impacts are quantifiable, which are great. We were able to increase revenues year over year by gazillions of dollars and, open new markets and, again, new revenues. But sometimes, and quite often, impacts are qualitative. I have a client, Susan, who is a director of the knowledge division for a major consulting firm, world-renowned consulting firm. And the consultants are encouraged to draft white papers and case studies and publish in articles in publications like Forbes and Fortune and Fast Company and that sort of thing as marketing devices for the consulting firm. Well, as the director of the knowledge function, content function in the firm, Susan, helps the authors kind of do some editing and get that stuff done. Well, there was no established format for this content to go out and be published. So there was no consistency in terms of how it reflected on the firm. And it was just all over the map, whatever the author, wanted to do. So Susan brought some of the more prolific authors together, and along with some of the division heads, and facilitated a development of a template that all the writers and consultants could use. And now they had an enterprise-wide consistency about how their content was developed and presented. And there was a brand down to that. That's a qualitative impact, and it's significant. It changed the behavior of how the firm went above. So we take all this information. We take their Clifton Strengths results. We take the results from those 3 questions, and we take their success stories, and we blend this all in to craft their leadership narrative. And this is their value proposition. This is clearly and concisely conveys that unique value. And it responds to 4 elements: what I do, why I do it, who I do it for, and how I do it. And the order's kind of important. The what and the how are the bookends, and the why and the who are kind of process oriented aspects. If you look at my LinkedIn profile at all, you will see that I followed this in the presentation of my profile. I think it's called the About section now on LinkedIn, and I do this explicitly. And if you looked at mine, you would see something like what I do. I help leaders level up in their careers. I work with established and rising leaders to frame their narratives, to clearly and concisely articulate what makes them unique and describe the value that they bring to organizations. Why I do it? Well, as Christy mentioned, I was a policy analyst, a policy person in a former life. When I went into my first career, which was public service, I went in to change the world, to make it a better place by working on big issues like economic development and and the workforce training and regional collaboration. And years later, I was addressing the same issues as when I began. So these days, as a coach, I change the world one person at a time by helping them recognize and act on their professional value, their leadership narrative. Who I do it for, besides you, I work with people who want to raise the bar, who want to make an impact, people who want to influence others to be bigger than themselves. I've coached people from all walks of life, corporate executives and elected officials who are challenged to transform their organizations, boomers trying to figure out the second act in their life, and new graduates starting out in their first career. How I do it, I customize a framework of purpose, clarity, focus, and strategy to help clients identify and articulate their leadership narrative, the story of their unique value. You get how that goes. So that's the leadership narrative. That's what, when someone calls me and says, hey, what can you do for me? This is what I talk about. I may not do it verbatim, but I cover those issues on what I do, why I do it, who I do it for, and how I do it. And those are important elements. You know, they really kind of glom on at the end to the how, the purpose, the clarity, the focus, the strategy. Purposes gets to the motivation, why you do the work you do. Clarity gets to what is it you do better than anyone else? What is that value that you bring? Focus are the stories that you tell about that value to others and to yourself. And that's where those SARs come in. And then strategy is execution. Where are the opportunities we want to target? And how do we begin to do that? Build a roadmap to get there. So it's important that you understand the professional value you bring in the context of being a strategic asset. Someone with the wisdom to ask the right questions, as opposed to a subject matter expert commodity with all the right answers, but someone who's always going to be looking over their shoulder at that younger, faster, cheaper person gaining on them. You know, be able to tell stories of your successes that demonstrate your value as a strategic asset, and make sure you're not telling old stories that don't help others see you in the light that you want to be in. So that's what I have. I'd love to be able to engage in some Q&A and see what we can maybe offer some clarity on.
This is great, Scott. I think it's really common, and somebody put in the chat previously, you know, she thought of herself as a financial analyst, and now, you know, it's more about leadership. I think we see this so much, especially with those with highly technical skills.
Right.
You know, it's those of you who have questions, please shout out. But there's so much, I think, confusion with people to switch that narrative.
It's a tough one. You know, if you're like my buddy George, the engineer, you know, that's been a key identity throughout his whole life. And it's hard for him to think in terms of himself other than an engineer. I mean, when we came together and started working together, what do you want to do? And he said, you know, I'm an engineer. I want to continue being an engineer. And when we went through his career history, and it struck me that, George, you'll never be hired as an engineer again. You know, you don't do engineering, you do engineering leadership. And that's what you need to focus on.
That's really key there. Okay, somebody asked a question. How do you address when you've been out of the workforce for 2 years, even though you've been looking?
Yeah,
that's a common question right now.
Yeah. Well, you know, again, you want to be able to reframe what you've done. If you've done technical work in the past, you know, our friend Sandy, who took 7 years off to raise her kids, was able to come back and kind of reframe the work she does in a much more value-based approach. Frankly, you know, in this day and age, the gaps in careers are not as significant as they used to be. You know, it used to be if you were out of work for for 2 years. It was a kiss of death. But you've got to be able to explain some of the things you've been doing in that 2 years. If you've just been sitting around, watching Oprah in the morning and eating bonbons, that's a tough one to create value from. But if you've been active in the community and you've been doing work for, say, Habitat for Humanity, or you went back and you got a degree or a certification, those are easily explained and again, easily done in a value-based approach.
Okay, and then Michael asks, I understand the George narrative, but what if George really wants to do more engineering?
Yeah, tough for George.
Well,
George,
what about other people? Because some
Yeah.
people are like engineers, and that's they don't necessarily want to be that engineering leader.
right, but he's kind of evolved into that, and it's a tough one. I mean, he could come back and we would talk about if I was working with George and he said, yeah, I just want to sit down at the drafting table or the CAD system and design, we would talk about different ways to do that. But it might be as an engineering educator. It might be as an engineering mentor, but he would have a tough time making that sell. Because if he applied for a job with a company, Acme Engineering, and he was an engineer, he said, oh, that's an engineer 3. I've done that. I can do that with my hands behind my back. Acme HR is going to look at that and say, we're not going to bring this guy in. And the reason is he's too overqualified. And the minute something better comes along, he's going to go and get another VP or CTO role in somewhere else. So we're not even going to bother. It's an assumption. It may be an erroneous.
Challenge that.
Hang on,
That's
what?
the fear of HR, right?
Pardon me?
That's the fear of HR, is that they hire somebody and then they go away.
Exactly. And so what George would have to do is to go back to his network and say, look, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of being an engineer leader. I have maybe 5 more years to work. I'd like to go back in and get my hands, dirty running CAD systems and that sort of thing. So first of all, he has to be able to show and demonstrate that he's up on the latest technology and that he can do all that with all the latest software, right? And then he has to be able to talk to the folks that know him well and say, look, this is what I'm looking to do. If you were me, who would you be talking to? And he obviously can't expect, if he was making, $250,000 a year as a VP of engineering with stock options and all that stuff, and money's no longer a big deal for him. He's going to probably have to come back down to a more reasonable engineer 3 compensation. So it's again he has to be able to tell the story of the role he's looking for in a way that people will get, or else other people will make assumptions that it's not the right fit for him, and so they're making the decision for him. He's not getting to tell a story.
And it's interesting because Michael Aday is experiencing that right now. He is an engineer. He's brilliant, and I think the challenge is people aren't seeing him as the engineer. Michael, you want to expand a little bit more on that?
So basically, I've done a bunch of different stuff, and Christy can give you more detail maybe later, but I don't want to bore everybody else on the call. But, I'm just looking to, I'm probably going to work for another 5 years.
Mhm.
I'm not interested in taking a super high-powered, super political, super, high level role, and I'm content to to earn less, right, than I was. I'm financially very secure and not worried about that at all. But this is exactly the issue that I'm having right now. I literally got off the phone with Google. Google calls me about every 6 months asking me if I'm interested in talking with them. They literally did on Tuesday again call me. I said, absolutely, I'm very happy to have a conversation with you. Had an extended conversation with them, and they said, we have a lot of these types of PM roles that we're looking to fill within Google Cloud. We're hiring 2,500 plus people in the next 12 months. But we think that you're kind of overqualified for this. And I say to them, listen, I've had, I'm not looking for any type of role in particular, management or IC. What I am interested in doing is solving difficult problems. That's what I enjoy doing. And so, I'm fine coming in as a PM, right? I don't really feel like I can say to them, hey, I'm only going to be there for the next 5 years.
Right.
But that's
So
that's the situation that I'm dealing with right now.
Yeah. So when Google calls you, Michael, are they calling you because you applied for that PM position, or they're just calling you because, boy, we'd really like to get Michael on our team. We just can't figure out where to fit him.
I've been referred to Google by existing Google employees, I think about 26 times. They're calling me out of the blue. They call me out of the blue every 6 months. They have for the last 2 years.
So I would ask the next call, I would ask the person, what makes you think I'm a good fit for this role? And get them to articulate, well, you've got a tremendous experience in, software development. You've led some incredible teams. We think you'd be a good fit because A, B, and C. And then that gives you something more specific to respond to. I'm really interested in the work that you're doing at Google, but I'm not interested in leading major multi-million-dollar projects. What I would like to do, for instance, I'd like to get my hands dirty and just write code. Or maybe you'd like to mentor up and coming engineers. Maybe that PM role could be more in a mentoring or working with people on a particular area of interest for you. But ask them the next time they call, what makes you think I'm a good fit? Get them to tell you.
Yeah, that's a good approach. I did kind of that in this last call.
The other thing is to look at
it's really kind of a wacky situation. I mean, I hate to dominate the call, but
the other thing I would suggest, and it's not just you, but is don't look at the Googles or the Microsofts or the Apples of the world. Look at those guys that are just starting up, that need a seasoned engineer to kind of take them to the next level so that they can begin to monetize their product. So scale down a bit in terms of the organizations that you're looking at.
So that's also advice straight from my wife as well.
Smart woman.
But frankly, I mean, so I do work with startups. I'm part of UC Berkeley's accelerator. So I mentor, 1 to 2 startups every 6 months, and have for 3 years now. It does work, to kind of make sure that I'm fresh on the current technology, make sure that I understand current market, current, competitive situation in the markets, the dynamics and everything. And it gives me an opportunity to kind of give back a little bit, but I definitely do not want to do another startup. So yeah, I hear you. Certainly, my wife has told me the same thing. But yeah, the way I kind of look at it is, I'm hoping maybe this 6-month exchange with Google will be different, and it'll yield, something that actually pays out. But it is a tough situation to be in. And I think it's unfortunate, that people kind of form these bias, right, in the hiring process. That it's totally not the case, right? The assumption that I have to make exactly what I was making in my last job, or the assumption that I'm going to go, into a IC role and expect to be paid like an executive, that's just kind of nuts, actually.
Yeah, you got to remember that HR systems are set up to make HR's job easier, not to get the best person,
Yeah.
And it's about being able to go through stacks of paper or, you know, resumes on file or whatever, and make quick and easy decisions. It's not necessarily about getting the best person for the role. And in doing that, they make assumptions that work against us most of the time. That's why it's important. You got to go through their front door, the HR, you know, job application process, but it's important to find a side door or a back door,
Totally agree.
you know, in terms of people you know in your network that you can have a conversation with and get their insight and advice as well on how to make the right approach and to whom.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Thanks, Michael. What other
Yep.
questions are there?
Remy asked a question of, what if the company wants you to do things they perceive you're the best to do, you're good at, but it's not your favorite work?
You know, again, I would ask the company, why me? Why do you think, again, I'm a good fit for this role? And try through that response to say, you know, I get what you're saying, but here's what I could really add value to. Here's what I could really help with. What do you think of that? One of the things that I advise clients when they're going in for interviews is, you know, to ask some really key questions like, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing over the next 3 to 6, 9 months? And what are the implications of not meeting that challenge? What happens if you don't meet that challenge? And then what are the resource gaps in being able to meet that challenge? Resources are time, money, and people, right? If you look at those three as a Venn diagram, the center of that Venn diagram is opportunity. And you can do that in the company you're in. And, you know, go to your boss or go to your director or whatever and say, you know, what do you see things shaking out over the next 3, 6, 9 months, year? What happens if we don't meet those, you know? And so you may be able to define a new role for yourself in that company within their needs, you know, within their needs. I mean, you can't necessarily go to an organization and say, hey, this is what I want to do. And if they say, geez, we don't have a need for that, you say, yeah, but this is really what I want to do. You know, the signal for you then is you better find somewhere else you can do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Scott, can you talk about the mindset to have when you're talking to a company? You know, it's one thing, the right things to say, but so many people, you know, have shared that they're going in and number one, they want to impress. Secondly, they're fearful about another rejection. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, the job search process is just such a crappy process, you know?
It's demoralizing.
It is. It really is. And we kind of allow it to happen, you know, and so there are, you know, again, one of the questions or things that I suggest for candidates for, you know, when you're going into an interview is ask that very first question in an interview. And that question is, what was it about my qualifications that prompted you to call me in today? And this does at least 3 things. One is it reminds them of why they reached out to Michael and thought he'd be a good candidate. The second thing it does is it gives Michael an idea of what their challenges are. And the third thing is this is a pure sales process. If the buyer says it, it's true. If the seller, we, the candidates, say it, it's just features and benefits, right? So if you ask that question in the beginning, you know, what was about my skills, my experience, my qualifications that prompted you to call? You know, and that again, they're sitting there going, oh yeah, the reason we liked him was A, B, and C. And now you can address A, B, and C, you know, and you're being incredibly focused and having a conversation around their concerns, their immediate concerns, right?
So it seems to kind of turn the tables, because so many people, even interviewers with interviewees, there's a superior inferior thing. And so asking that question seems to level the playing field a bit. And it puts you in a position of power, because then that's brilliant, Scott.
So it's not, I hesitate to talk about it in terms of power relationships. I think we have been conditioned, right, to go in as a one down. My wife, the therapist, would say, we take a one down in that role. We need to level up and be one-on-one with them and have a conversation about how I can help you solve your problems. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the people on the other side of the table that are doing the interview are shitty interviewers. Sorry for the language, but they have no freaking idea of how to act. They know what they can't ask. They know that they can't ask that gray-haired guy with, right, how old he is, or when he graduated from high school or college,
or how much longer he's going to work.
Exactly. They know they can't ask that woman, how many kids does she have at home? Is she going to be pregnant anytime soon? Is she married? All that stuff. They know what they can't do, but they have no idea how to ask questions that derive the best candidate for their needs. And so we have to help them. And by asking that question up front, by asking questions like, what are your big challenges over the next 3 to 6 months? What are the implications of not meeting those challenges? What are the resource gaps? We become almost consultative to them in being able to position ourselves differently. And that's the other thing. Everybody else is going to go in with a one down kind of thing, or else be arrogant and say, I'm the man, you need me, which may or may not.
That doesn't work either. Okay, yeah. Brent asks, what about peer and stakeholder interviews? So it's great if it's like you're talking to your future boss, but what about like the peer?
Yeah. So often we call those informational interviews or strategic conversations. And basically what you're doing is, I'm assuming what he means is you're going in and you're talking to people about a job or a role that you're interested in, the kind of.
No, well, this is like, so when a company has you talk to
right,
your potential future peers.
Right. Got it. Thank you. So if a company calls you in for an interview, you've already met the basic qualifications. They're not calling somebody in because, Scott went to Old Dominion University in Virginia and my son goes to, I'm going to call him in just to see, what the changes are at Old Dominion University. They're not doing that. They're looking at, hey, this guy looks like he could help us out. He meets our basic minimum qualifications. When you go in for the interview now, the boss wants to know, can he rely on you? Are you going to do what he needs you to do, right? Peers and other stakeholders want to know, are you going to be a good team player? So one of the things, if you're in with a bunch of peers, I would say is, what is it you need from me in order for you to be successful in this project? What do I need to do to help you be successful? It's all about helping them be successful.
I like that. That's a great approach. Okay, now how can people contact you and how do they work with you?
So scottwoodardcoaching.com is the website.
And we'll send out your link with the recording.
Yeah, and Scott at scottwoodardcoaching.com is the email. Those are the best ways to reach out.
So
and again,
do you have specific
go ahead.
types of situations that you work with people on, or?
So I typically work with, rising leaders, mid to late career people who are looking for the next step in their career, and helping them frame those stories, right? So that they're not trapped in the old stories. I have colleagues that do really well with recent grads, but I tend to work more with the more seasoned and more mature folks. And again, I'll reiterate, Christy, to put the link in the chat for the Clifton Strengths, and anybody who wants to take that and get some insight, I'll be glad to share my thoughts on it for you.
Okay. We'll make sure that we send that out with the recording and a note. And so everyone gets the link to the recording. And so anybody have one more question? Go ahead and shout it out. All right. Okay. Well, Scott, thank you so much. I love the value-based versus the subject matter expert approach. And we'll get your contact information out to everyone ASAP. And Julia just said, thank you. I learned quite a bit. And
good.
What about this? What if you're told you're too senior for a role you like?
Well, that sounds like Michael's issue, right?
Yeah.
They want him to come in at a role that he really doesn't want to do anymore. So it's going back and finding out again what their real issues are, what their real problems are, and being able to help them define a better role for you in that regard.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate you. I appreciate your feedback, and I appreciate the advice. This was very insightful, and I hate that I turned into the poster child for the session.
No, this is good. Wait,
but
what you're experiencing, Michael, so many other people do. So I'm glad that
Yeah, you're not alone out there, Michael. That's for sure.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the
Thank you.
gracious advice.
Okay, well, Scott, we're going to have you back. I know that people want to hear more from you, and thank you so much. We're going to send out your information. Hopefully, people will reach out and get some more insights. And Sierra, hit the music. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.